I'm Brandy Clark-Burton, founder and chief inspiration officer of the Austin Eco Network.
And I'm Andrew Dobbs, program director for Texas Campaign for the Environment. Voting in this runoff has already begun. It runs through December 12th. Election day is December 16th. Tonight, we'll be hosting a debate between the two remaining candidates for Austin mayor, Mike Martinez and Steve Adler, one of whom will be Austin's first leader under the brand new 10-1 city council system.
In the first section of the debate, we will direct a question to one of the candidates, and they will have 2 minutes to respond. Then the opposing candidate will have 2 minutes in which they can contest the first response and provide their own answers to the question. Then the first candidate will have 1 more minute for rebuttal. We will alternate who gets asked each question first. Near the end, we will have lightning rounds with 1 minute each to maximize the issues addressed by the candidates.
Mr. Adler, Councilmember Martinez, this is a debate and not a forum. The point of this discussion is to draw out contrasts in your policies and your records, and to delve into specifics about how you would work to protect Austin's air, water, land, and resources. We intend for you to hold one another accountable for these specifics. To ensure that we have enough time for those details, let's go ahead and get started.
Councilmember Martinez won the coin toss and opted to speak last. The first question will be directed to you, Mr. Adler.
Mr. Adler, you have represented more than one landowner in their attempts to exempt themselves from the requirements of Austin's Save Our Springs ordinance. You took advantage of bills passed by the Texas legislature to override this ordinance, including the so-called Lowe's bill, which was passed in order to allow a client of yours to develop a property on the Barton Springs recharge zone. How should voters consider this past conduct of yours when deciding whether to vote for you?
I'm a strong proponent of the SOS ordinance, and as mayor, I would vigorously defend the SOS ordinance. I think that the environmental assets that we have, especially Barton Springs, are part of what makes the spirit and soul of Austin, and it's critical for the quality of life. It's who we are. Over the course of my career, I've represented thousands of people. I've represented the Texas Nature Conservancy. I've been involved in a lot of progressive lawsuits and actions. This question you ask about several lawsuits out of that group, and you asked specifically about the Lowe's case. The Lowe's was a case that I got brought into several years after the facts that gave rise to that case happened. I was brought in for the purpose of trying to settle it. This was a case that involved two environmental groups, two cities on opposite sides of that lawsuit. Two environmental groups, and they were at loggerheads, and the case was in a real difficult place, and I was brought in to try to resolve it. After coming in again, a little over 2 years after it had started, in 9 months I had the case resolved. And I had the case resolved in a way that the attorney representing the Save Our Springs, SOS Alliance, said was good for the aquifer, and it was a good step forward. I was proud of that resolution. It resulted in $2 million being spent for open space. It resulted in a store being built that at the time was the most ecologically friendly store in the country that had been built. So we came in late in the process, and I'm proud of the result that we achieved.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez, you have 2 minutes.
To respond.
To respond.
Well, I just think if you're having to explain, sometimes you just have to own up for decisions you made, and Lord knows I know about that. If you're having to explain it in detail and justify your actions, it's a defensive posture. When you make a mistake and when you make a decision that you wish you'd made a better decision, you own up to it and you explain why and what you would do different. One of the things that I've learned as a council member, I've learned many things, but I've certainly learned from our mistakes. And today was a historic example of actions that were taken by the city council that hopefully by a positive vote of a majority of the council next Thursday will make us the leading city in the country as it relates to climate protection, renewable energy, and pushing our utility farther than anyone has ever pushed it before. And it wasn't us. It was you all that did it. It was the stakeholders, Solar Austin, Beyond Coal, the Sierra Club. But when staff came back to us today and said, we think we can do all this, but we still think we need 500 megawatts of combined cycle gas, we said, you know what? We don't think you do. I don't believe that's the right direction, but I'm willing to let you convince me of that because of previous decisions that I've made as a council member. And so we moved this plan forward that said any new generation of gas would come after an independent study and after a subsequent vote of the future city council, which I believe is most appropriate for an investment of that size. The bottom line was, we've learned from mistakes that we've made. We're making better decisions today, and it couldn't have been done without the community. And I'm going to respect Roy Whaley's time as a timekeeper because I've seen him get shut down numerous times at City Hall, and I'm going to try to avoid him doing that to me tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Adler, you have 1 minute.
Well, I hope you bring us back to what happened today. I'm real excited about what happened today. I hope that the study is broader than what I saw it was going to be. But back to the question that we asked, that Lowe's case is one that I regret taking. And I regret handling that case, not because I don't think the result was good for the aquifer, not because I don't think that I was able to come into a situation and make it be the best that it could possibly be, but because by handling that case, I've given an opportunity for people to misrepresent the facts associated with that case and to call into question the values that I have, the work that I've done my entire life. And for that reason, I wish I hadn't provided that opportunity and taken that case.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez, while on council, you voted for the construction of Water Treatment Plant 4 and the biomass plant, both of which were opposed by the environmental community, and which you now admit were mistakes. Once again, City Council is looking to make a decision on a controversial water project, building new golf courses near Decker Lake that may compromise our water resources. Do you support this proposal? And if so, why are you ignoring environmental concerns again?
Well, I'm not ignoring environmental concerns. In fact, that's why we didn't take action on it, because of the concerns that were raised. This proposal that's coming before us is a proposal for a plan that we've had in place at the city since 1968 to develop that open space. It's being couched, though, in terms of as if we're giving public parkland to a private entity, and it's just not the case. Right now, it's fenced off. It's barbed wire. It's not something that we can use as an asset in our park system. The private investment that would happen would create 2 golf courses, but it would open it up to further amenities that is 100% open to the public. There are concerns about the amount of water that would be used. At the last council meeting, one of the developers, I can't remember which one, Mr. Ogilvy, I think, may have been, talked about the new technologies that are available for golf courses to use reclaimed water and non-potable sources. Again, that proposal is not before the council in its entirety. It's simply been brought to us at this point. But there's a bigger issue going on here as well. I wouldn't say bigger. There's another big issue going on. And that is that the adjacent neighbors and community members around there, to hear their testimony, you cannot dismiss it. They've had years of landfills and animal shelters and prisons and things built in their community they quite frankly don't want. And to them, this is an asset. If we can do it in an environmentally safe manner, and if we can provide an economic asset to that community, which I think that's what they're hoping for, and that's why they're supportive of this, then I think it's worthy of our consideration. But I have not seen it in complete detail. I wait, just like the rest of the community, to find out how we're going to maintain this golf course if we're going to use potable water sources.
Mr. Adler, you have 2 minutes to respond.
Sometimes I think that the city acts in ad hoc ways, making decisions based on things that are brought to them without regard to larger paradigm, longer-term plans. And I would like to see the city do that a lot more. I think the example of the wood-burning power plant, that was the $2.3 billion contract we entered into that is now sitting mostly idle and costing the city $54 million a year, as an example. Water Treatment Plant 4, that cost a lot of money and is one of the reasons why now people conserve on their water bills and don't understand why the water bills continue to go up. providing us capacity that we don't need. And in both of those cases, we were warned that those were not the right decisions to make, but yet we still made them. And I think, as I look at what's happening out at Decker Lake, I have the same kind of concerns that were inherent in the question that you asked. The city doesn't have a lot of open land. As you look around the city, there are just few places where we have it, and we should be adding to it rather than putting it to these kinds of uses that are not as open to the public generally as they might be. I understand the need for economic engines to be built in that community. I spent almost 10 years at the legislature trying to create opportunities for economic engines in communities that didn't have them. But if that's the goal, if that's what we're trying to do with the land, then is this the best goal? Is this the best use of the land that could be furthering that point and providing those things for the neighborhoods? I have questions about it, just like the other ones.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I wouldn't call a 1968 plan an ad hoc plan. It's been in place for over 47 years that we would build golf courses on this site and open it up with other amenities to the public. So this is not an ad hoc decision. This is not something that just came up. It is a new proposal. It is a private investment. No city tax dollars will go into this. And if you heard the questions that many of us asked, and one specifically that I asked was, what would be the city's hook if, let's say we went into this agreement and the golf course failed, because as it's been pointed out, golf is considered a dying sport. What debt would we owe? And there is no debt, because you can't finance golf courses. It's all private investments. It's all individual investors. So it would be an open space that has been built out so that the public can use, that would be handed back to us should the venture fail. I think we have to consider it, but we have to see the details before we make that final decision.
Thank you. Each candidate has been given the opportunity to ask the other a question, and they submitted these questions ahead of time. Mr. Adler, this is Councilmember Martinez's question for you. Can you tell Austin voters what involvement you've had with the City Council, specifically concerning the environment, in your 36 years in Austin?
I've been involved in a lot of things in the city over 36 years and a lot of different activities, but I have not been in front of the City Council with respect to an environmental issue. But I don't think that means that I'm not qualified for or can't be a good mayor in the city. I think there are a lot of people in this city that with this 10-1 process are being given a voice. There are new communities and new leaders that are coming to the table for the very first time. And I don't think that the price to being able to participate in government now is a demonstration that you were in front of the council on every issue that the council deals with. I don't think that that's the standard that we should set. I've been real involved with the environment. I represented the Texas Nature Conservancy in the fight to save the sable palm. I helped lead the effort with Senator Shapley to stop the Asarco smelter in El Paso and ultimately to pull down that stack. I was at the forefront of the battle to fight the nuclear waste dump that was going into Andrews County. I've been involved in those areas. I have chosen to get involved in those things where I could make as meaningful a contribution as I could, a deep dive, as it were, trying to use legal skills or the legislative opportunities that I've been in. I think that the bona fides I have and the track record that I have, even on environmental work, is strong. And I hope to be able to bring that to the work in this city because, again, the environmental heritage that we have is part and parcel of who we are and one of the most significant reasons why I'm here.
Councilman Martinez, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I asked that question because, quite honestly, I've been on city council for 8 years, and I've only missed one city council meeting in that entire time, and I simply don't recall Steve ever being in front of the council on any issue, much less an environmental issue. I also don't ever recall emails or advocacy in any other capacity. And I agree with Steve. It doesn't mean that that disqualifies you for running for office. That is not my point. My point is, if you're going to run for the highest office of your local municipal government, you would hope, or I would hope, that that person would have been involved in some of the issues that the city government has been involved in for decades that are critically important, not just to the environment, but to the quality of life, to affordability, to transportation, to all the issues that we know are the hot button issues in this campaign.
Thank you. Councilmember
No,
Martinez?
real quick, Mr. Adler has a minute to respond.
Oh, sorry.
I would just add parenthetically that I have been involved in city processes. I was part of the Create Austin process. I was on the leadership council of that. I helped start the No Place for Hate program that's now in over 300 schools, and as an outgrowth of that, helped to conceive of and create the Austin Hate Crimes Task Force, working with other members of the council that had chosen to get involved in that project when we were setting that up.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez, Mr. Adler's question for you is this: why did you vote for Water Treatment Plant 4?
As you all know, it was a long process leading up to that decision. Ultimately, I voted on it because I believed we needed that piece of infrastructure to reduce our energy consumption, to increase efficiency, and to also set a long-term glide path for the future growth of Austin, which we all know has seen throughout the history, and we all know we can't stop moving forward. We also had made a prior decision to close Green Water Treatment Plant in downtown Austin, and so that had an effect. Ultimately, and I've said this to you all, and I've said this publicly and privately in private meetings with you all, the decision should have been tied to demand and not just an arbitrary start date. Had we tied it to demand, and had we known we were going to head into the biggest drought we've ever seen, when we made the decision, it was in 2008 to move forward with the plant. On April 5th of 2010, Lake Travis was 100% full. So no one could foresee that drought coming. But had we tied it to demand and implemented our conservation measures, which our community thoroughly embraced, and I'm so proud of the conservation that has taken place because of our community's actions and our council's policies, that plant wouldn't be under construction right now. And that's the simple answer is, I think it was an important decision. I think it could have been a better decision. And my chief of staff made this recommendation to me. And I just honestly looked at him and said, I don't think I can do that. I've made a commitment that I would be in favor of this vote. And so I'm going to move forward and stick to my commitment. And that is a big difference, I think, in leadership, is when you make a commitment, you have to stick to it sometimes, and then you got to own it afterwards. And sometimes it is a mistake, and this was ultimately that mistake without that provision.
Thank you. Mr. Adler, you have 2 minutes to respond.
I'm confused. It sounds a decision to build it once demand rises to a certain level almost sounds like a decision to vote not to do it, but to leave open the door for the proposal to come back if demand should ever justify it in the future. I guess that might have been a cleaner way to have dealt with it.
Is that your final answer?
That's my final
Okay.
answer.
Councilmember Martinez, you have 1 minute to respond to that.
Obviously, I should face criticism for that decision, and I have, and I will continue to. But I find it interesting that the biggest supporters of Steve Adler's campaign are the exact same folks that pushed us so hard to vote in favor of Water Treatment Plant 4, and that have pushed us so hard for so many of the policies that he now says he's not going to be a part of or wouldn't be fostering as mayor of the city of Austin. He calls me the status quo. Steve's endorsed by the mayor. Steve's endorsed by the chamber elite folks. Steve's endorsed by the Austin Board of Realtors. So I don't understand how I can be the status quo when that's the status quo who has been driving policy at City Hall for decades and who I have been fighting against for almost a decade.
Thank you. Mr. Adler, in your questionnaire, you said that, quote, "We need to encourage distributed, renewable energy generation and move our utility toward being a provider of distribution, connectivity, grid services, and the sale or lease of distributed power equipment, as opposed to relying so much on selling power." While these are good ideals, the statement lacks details. What specific, concrete policies will you put in place, and why are you a better person for this job than Councilmember Martinez?
I think that at the council level, you expect the leaders to establish policy and to establish direction. I mean, it's real clear that we are, over time, going to be selling less and less power as people conserve more and more, as we get more and more distributed power, as people are putting more and more solar on their homes and soon more and more solar on commercial buildings. But yet we have a utility whose business model is dependent on selling more and more power. It puts the utility in a conflict situation where the better and better it does with distributed power, or the better and better it does with conservation, the harder it is to, the more it fails on generating greater and greater revenue.
So how would you address that?
Well, I think that it is the leadership's position on City Council to demand a different business model, and to take the city staff through.
I'm sorry. We warned them ahead of time that if it wasn't getting specific, we might poke a little bit. Just so really what the question is, what specific policies could we put in place? Because we know the business model needs to shift, or we've heard you say that. So how can that be specifically? What do you propose?
I think it's specific when the leader goes to the Austin Energy and says, I want to see the business model that deals with it in a different way. One that begins to develop revenue sources like the PEC used to do when it was first starting, and it was in a community where no one had power, and it started financing washing machines so people had ways to plug in. I think it's those kinds of models. Now, this is cutting edge stuff, because at the international and national conferences that exist right now, as utility companies gather to try and figure out what is that business model that works and how do you transition into it, there's a lot of debate that's going on right now. I am not an expert in that field. I would rely on people in this room, as well as the other experts that would come to bear. But I think as a leadership position sitting on the council, we have, and this council should have, as the board of directors, demanded that transition plan.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez, you have 2 minutes to respond.
I think our environment, in terms of the public utility, is completely changing. You all will become prosumers. You'll become producers and consumers at the exact same time. Technology is getting us to that point. That is exactly where we're headed with this new generation plan. When we see things like the ability to increase our utility scale solar by 600 megawatts, our community scale solar by 200 megawatts, now we're changing the business model of the utility. But here's the other effect on the business model. It's just not the decisions that we make as council. We are controlled by ERCOT. We are in a nodal market. And so you'll hear our staff tell us we have to have this dispatchable power. That's why we need 500 megawatts of combined cycle. It's the nodal market that's creating that, and it's because staff wants to generate, not wants to, they have to, because of our policy decisions, they have to generate that revenue for that $100 million transfer into the general fund that pays for other critical services. It's one of the key components of why you all own your utility. You should. It's a tremendous asset. But we need to rely less and less upon that transfer so that we can right-size the economy side of our utility and invest more in research and development like storage and demand-side management so that we can meet all of our renewable goals and not have to rely upon fossil fuels, and let you all be the producers and the consumers at the same time. I drive an electric Volt. When I plug my Volt in, if it's in a peak demand time, why can't the utility suck the energy out of the battery in my car to use that as demand side management and demand response? Those technologies are readily available to us. That is the future of where we're headed.
Thank you. Mr. Adler, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, again, as we move more and more to distributed power, as we move more and more to solar and wind power, we begin to change the portfolio we have. which means we're changing the risk model that we are willing to accept, and we're moving away from dispatchability to predictability. But again, I haven't seen what the business model is that still generates revenue for this city, that still generates revenue for Austin Energy in that world where we are selling less and less energy. And that question in my mind still hasn't been answered. I want to see what the plan looks like, where we're selling and financing solar equipment and solar panels. What is it that we're doing in order to be able to generate revenue from that business and also to encourage that kind of activity? And it's that kind of long-term thinking and plan that is now just beginning in the industry that I want Austin to be out in front of and leading.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez, the Austin metro area is expected to grow by more than 1 million people in the next 15 years. There is broad concern that we cannot provide enough drinking water to these people, cannot keep up with stormwater infrastructure in light of the higher density and increasingly intense storms, cannot preserve neighborhood characters and green space, and cannot meet our net zero greenhouse gas goals in light of this growth. How can we meet these specific needs? And if we can't, how do we prevent such unsustainable growth?
There are many things that we can do to meet the future needs, but it starts with conservation. It starts with repairing leaky infrastructure. I've also mentioned in this campaign, sorry, my pacemaker was going off.
It's a tough question.
And all of those 1 million people, their last name is Martinez. So get ready. One of the things I've talked about on the campaign trail is recapture. You know, we have a watershed here, and when it rains, it goes into the culverts, into the creeks, and into the Colorado River, and it's gone. And it's a lost resource. Yes, we have the Highland Lakes, and they capture rain. But when you look at where the desert has reached to, east of us, the aquifers still remain plentiful. The lakes still remain plentiful. To the west of us, just west of Mopac, not so much. We need to create a recapture system, such as other cities that are doing, so that we can capture that water, save hundreds of thousands of acre feet of water a year by using that through non-potable sources like irrigation, like flushing toilets, things of that, like HVAC, like heating and cooling our entire community through central chilling sites. Those are the initiatives that we need to embark upon to handle the demand for water consumption that is already here and that we know is going to come with the future growth. As it relates to the future growth, really quickly, the Imagine Austin plan, Code Next, that's how we plan for where we're going to put these folks, in the most appropriate places, connected to things like high-capacity transit, connected to areas like high-growth corridors and job creation corridors such as the 130 corridor and east of I-35.
Did you need me to reread the question because of the beeper?
Would you please?
Yes, absolutely. The Austin metro area is expected to grow by more than 1 million people in the next 15 years. There is broad concern that we cannot provide enough drinking water to these people, cannot keep up with stormwater infrastructure in light of higher density and increasingly intense storms, cannot preserve neighborhood characters and green space, and cannot meet our net zero greenhouse gas goals in light of this growth. How can we meet these specific needs? And if we can't, how do we prevent such unsustainable growth? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Well, the growth is coming, I fear, whether we want it or not. I think that Austin stops growing the day we figure out how to move the University of Texas and the state capital to another city. And we can't. So we're going to continue to grow here. It's the quality of life that keeps me here that's so wonderful that's going to bring additional people here. But we have to figure out how to manage that growth and not let it manage us. You know, sometimes I feel like we have a tiger by the tail and we're just being whipped around. With respect to the specific issues that you raised, water was the first one. I think we should avoid trying to buy new water supplies as much as we can. And people are already gathering for us to go out to the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer in Lee and Bastrop counties and buy water supplies. We need to do a lot more on water conservation, and we need to look at demand management as a water supply. We need to do a lot more water collection, but we have to be careful that we're not, by collecting water, damaging the runoff that's filling the streams and the creeks and the downstream flows. We have to do a lot more with water reuse than we use. You know, the city of San Antonio reuses almost 40% of its water. The city of Austin, you know, different than San Antonio, but even still the city of Austin only reuses about 5% of its water. We have pipes that for a year and a half went to the University of Texas with water reuse that they wouldn't tap into because their PVC pipes were the wrong color, and we had an ordinance that stopped them from being able to tie into it. We have to, the growth is coming, and we have to be able to move people around. We have to improve what we do with transportation, which I think is a land planning question. It's a question of how we live and where we live as much as it's an infrastructure question. That's going to deal with the affordability issues. We can't continue to send everybody downtown. We're going to deal with increased gentrification. We're going to never be able to catch up with supply and demand. We need a second downtown urban area, Midtown. But all these issues come up, and we need to deal with them.
Thank you. And Councilman Martinez, you have a minute.
You know, obviously I think we need to use reclaimed water to the largest extent possible, but you all know this as well. We're in a very different scenario than San Antonio. The Colorado River the water in the Colorado River is not controlled by us, it's controlled by LCRA. And we have to maintain downstream flows and environmental flows for very specific and good reason. That's why I believe that the future of conservation and the future of water use is in things like recapture. When you talk about issues like flooding that happen in Austin, what better way to mitigate flooding and impervious cover runoff than on-site capture? As we go through this Code Next process, those are going to be the very tough decisions that this council is going to have to make, whether or not we impart that into our land development code so that we can create that sustainable model. I think we have to. I don't think it's a choice of should we or should we not. We have to continue pushing this envelope farther forward than we ever have, because the growth is coming and we have to deal with it.
Thank you. Now we move into the lightning rounds of this debate. For each of these questions, the first candidate will be given 1 minute to respond, and then the opposing candidate will have 1 minute to answer that response. We will alternate between the candidates.
Remember to draw out contrasts and to be specific. The first question goes to Councilmember Martinez.
What specific changes can be made to Austin's water business plan to make sure residents don't have higher bills despite conserving water?
It's a great question, because Steve constantly says on the campaign trail, you conserve, but yet your bills go up. Well, what do you think would happen if we actually lowered your water utility rates? You wouldn't conserve. We right-size the water utility by rewarding those who conserve, those who are below the average consumer use, and by charging what water is worth for those who are abusers and heavy users, which is what the council did at the last council meeting. We changed our utility rate structures for water users so that if you're a heavy consumer or if you're a water abuser, you're going to pay for what water is worth, and that is a whole lot more than if you're just an average water customer.
Thank you. Mr. Adler, you have 1 minute to respond.
We need to change, and we've been saying for months now that with respect to the water bills, we needed to change how we did utility fees, the drainage fees, that they were unfair and improperly being charged. And it looks like just now the city staff is making a proposal to do that, so it's probably good we had the campaign. But with respect to water and conservation, I think people would conserve. But we need to help them understand that they're conserving not to lower their bills, because that's not going to happen. People need to understand that their ability to be able to conserve is what it is that's enabling us to be able to put off a $1 billion expenditure to buy water supplies from the Carrizo-Wilcox. I think this community would rally around conservation goals if they knew what it was, and if they could see visually as they were conserving it was helping to avoid those kind of expenses. And it's that kind of community will making that is important in government, and that's what the mayor should be doing.
Thank you. Mr. Adler, only 72% of Austinites recycle. The Austin Zero Waste Master Plan includes a proposal to eventually have fines for failing to recycle. Do you support this element of the master plan? And how do you propose to reach our zero waste goals?
Again, I think that the zero waste goals are something that our community will rally behind if it's properly presented and if it's made top of mind. If it's something that becomes part of the community conversation, if it's built into what it is that makes us proud to be part of this city. Those kind of goals are oftentimes difficult to achieve. Once you achieve the low-hanging fruit, the next levels become harder and harder to be able to achieve. Eventually, you want to get more people involved. You reach the tipping point because more people get involved because others have. You do a lot of activities through kids so that they go home and they're trying to change the culture in their families. Ultimately, I am supportive of those kind of mandates because I think that's how you get the recalcitrant few at the end. But you have to get to the place where they're the recalcitrant few in order for that kind of policy to work. But I think that's part of the power that the mayor has. It's the power to convene and the power of the bully pulpit, and both those powers would come into play here.
And Mr. Martinez?
Yeah, we're going to be 5% short of our waste diversion goals this year if we don't do something pretty drastic. And when I heard about that, and I realized that, you know, what we're missing, the key missing component is your bathroom trash can. Most of us don't have recycle bins in our bathroom. They're in the kitchen area. So we don't think about what we're putting in our bathroom trash. It's about education. It's about really getting that message out there. And we took some criticism when the council put in their budget about $400,000 for an education plan. We took a lot of criticism. But we had to vote for that because in order to truly achieve those waste diversion goals, you have to message it right. You have to help folks understand what can and can't be recycled so that we can achieve those diversion goals. And ultimately, that $400,000 will pay for itself over and over and over because we're not landfilling things that could be recycled and could be used as a commodity for our city.
Yes or no, do you support fines for failing to recycle?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Martinez. Environmentalists in East Austin have successfully worked to close or relocate tank farms, Holly Power Plant, and BFI facilities. They are still working to relocate the industrial foundry Pure Castings out of a residential neighborhood, also near a school. Will you provide leadership in securing a land swap to accomplish this?
I have worked on this issue, and I started out as a firefighter in 1992 on East 12th Street and Weberville Road, and I quickly learned what a tank farm was because we were making repeated 911 calls, and I quickly learned who Poder was because they were fighting and protesting every single step of the way, those tank farms, and I applaud their work. We've also worked with them on this pure casting issue. Mr. Edgerton owns Pure Casting. He's been there, I don't know, 4 decades maybe, shy of 4 decades. My understanding is it's not just about a land swap because we tried this. We tried to offer a piece of land, and it wasn't a formal offer. I just verbally said, would you take that offer should one be made to you? It's about setting up a foundry, and the cost of setting up a new foundry in today's environment, in today's regulatory environment, he wanted millions of dollars to help him do that. He's currently operating under a 4-decade-old foundry that was permitted back then, and it's too costly for him to relocate.
Mr. Adler, you have 1 minute to respond.
I think being able to relocate that foundry and moving it out of its location in East Austin would be an incredibly powerful symbol, as well as something which would be much needed in that community, even for the elementary school across the street, as well as the rest of the neighborhood. And my understanding as well is that it is both a question of a new piece of land as well as the regulatory requirements around a site like that. But I would very much like to dive into that for both of those reasons. For environmental reasons, it's important. For community development, for the neighborhood, it's important. But I also think that it would be an incredible symbol for what it would mean if this community, together as a whole, made that kind of effort in East Austin.
Thank you. Mr. Adler, you said in a questionnaire that you do not support nuclear power, but, quote, we may be faced with tough choices in the next 15 years. Does this mean that you think nuclear power is inevitable for Austin? Do you support Austin being a part of the South Texas Nuclear Project for an additional 20 years?
I would like to see Austin move away from nuclear power and coal power. I would like to see us move to wind and solar. And I think that goes back to the business plan question we were talking about earlier and the changing of time. You know, right now we have a system that's based on the risks associated with dispatchability. So it's a question of we take the risk of the fuels that we use and changing in fuel prices, and we take a risk of the maintenance of major plants, and we come up with what we need to do. But as we move forward in the future, the risks associated with being able to predict weather patterns and wind patterns and sun availability 7 hours and 18 hours and 72 hours and 7 days in advance will get better. And over time, I think that the risk model will begin to change. And the tolerances we have to be able to move away from that kind of power and to renewable powers are going to increase. And that's what I meant. In that time period, I want Austin to lead the world.
Councilmember Martinez.
Absolutely no more nuke. When Juan left the utility and went to work for NRG, they came back with a proposal for an expansion of units 3 and 4, and I said emphatically no. Not only should we not invest in more nuclear, we should divest what we have and start investing in research and development, investing in storage and renewables. That is where we should be moving in the future, and that is what I'll continue to support.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez. Austin won't continue to be a green city without a thriving urban forest. We are losing trees at an alarming rate. Between drought and development, managing our urban forest poses significant challenges. What specifically will you do to manage and protect Austin's tree health, canopy, and diversity?
So we have to come up with measurables. We have to establish a baseline of where we are today in terms of our air quality, our carbon emissions. Figure out what that baseline is today and put policies in place that require mitigation moving forward so that that measure doesn't get worse. As it gets worse, the cost of mitigation increases with development. I absolutely support our heritage tree ordinance, and I voted in favor of it. But we have to think broader than just protecting what we have. Not only do we need to protect what we have to vastly expand our tree canopy. And mitigation is not just making up for what you tore down. Mitigation is adding to what you already have because of the tremendous growth that's happening in our community.
And what about the health and diversity of our current stock of trees?
Can you repeat that last part?
What about the health and stock of and diversity of our current stock of trees?
Yes, I mean, we had the battle at Barton Springs over tearing down some of those trees. I happened to be on that trail one day when a tree limb fell right in front of 2 joggers. I get that we need to protect what we have, but we have to maintain the health of those, and sometimes it means trimming those trees and cutting them back a little bit. And, you know, it's difficult decisions, but we have to take care of them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Adler, you have 1 minute to respond.
Again, I think that valuing the urban forest that we have and trees in this community is part and parcel, again, of the spirit and soul that is Austin. And it needs to be protected, and it's something that we need to invest in. And I support that. I think that the best way for us to do that going forward is to make it an integral part of the Code Next process that's happening right now. And as Code Next has started off in its first year, there have been some questions about the priority in that process of the urban forest that we have. We need to be able to preserve it. We need to be able to grow it. We need to be able to do it in a drought-resistant manner. And it needs to become an integral part of the Code Next process that we have, because in that process we're developing the compact and the contract that as a city we're going to move forward as we do the developments. It is important. It was part of the Imagine Austin plan. I think that it's mentioned 46 times, I think, in the document. It's part and parcel, but it needs to be reflected in the plans that we're using.
Mr. Adler, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that, quote, continued emission of greenhouse gases will cause further warming and long-lasting changes in all components of the climate system, increasing the likelihood of severe, pervasive, and irreversible impacts for people and ecosystems. To meet this challenge and to meet Austin's net zero greenhouse gas goals, will you support Austin Energy becoming fossil fuel free? And how and when do we get there?
I would support us becoming fossil fuel free, and I want us to get there as soon as we can. I can't put a date on it. But I think that it is entirely appropriate for the city council and for the mayor to say that we're going to establish the earliest date possible that we can. And we have goals that we've set, and I think we have to continue to push those goals. And if the opportunity exists to be able to improve upon them, we should. But again, I think this is something else. You know, in the environmental community and with the environmental issues, a lot of the issues we're dealing with are education issues. A lot of the issues that we're dealing with are questions of political will and social will within the community. And it's real important for that value base and for those goals to be incorporated in and part of a wider consciousness. And again, I think that that's something that the mayor, in his function in the city, should be doing.
And Councilmember Martinez, 1 minute.
Yeah, 2025. We should be completely fossil fuel free, 2025. If we adopt the generation plan that we talked about today, and if our study shows that we don't need to further invest in a combined cycle gas plant, we are on a glide path to about 2025 to being fossil fuel free. One of the things, though, that gets talked about in these discussions is the cost. It costs too much. It costs too much. But you just mentioned something that rarely, if ever, gets discussed, and that's the cost to our health, the cost to the citizens, and what it transcends into in terms of our central health or your health insurance rates and other things that have a tremendous cost to us, the taxpayers, as citizens. So I believe we absolutely can and will be fossil fuel free very shortly, but it isn't going to be by chance, and it isn't going to be by accident. It's going to take a lot of hard work and tough decisions.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez, with new standards going into effect, Austin is likely to be in non-attainment with the Clean Air Act's ambient air quality standards. What will be your approach to getting Austin's air cleaned up?
Massively expanding our public transit system, as I've worked on for the last 4 years to turn Capital Metro around, to make sure that the legislature didn't dissolve our public transit agency. We can't build enough roads. We can't build enough new lanes. The future of Austin has to have the best possible public transit system in the country. And our citizens, you all made it clear, you're not ready, some of us aren't ready for urban rail for various reasons, whether it's routing, whether it's the cost. But that doesn't mean we don't go right back to work after November 4th and do everything we can to affect a positive outcome on our congestion and our traffic problems. And to me, that's through public transportation. I think we should expand our bus system to all parts of our community so that folks will have an opportunity to have an alternative choice as opposed to getting in their vehicles and removing those tailpipes from the road, which is the largest contributor to carbon emissions in Austin.
Mr. Adler, you have 1 minute to respond.
I think that the biggest contributors to that would be tailpipes and construction activity, and then the power plants we have, like Decker. So we need to be able to address those, and transit is the first one we need to address. We need to get people out of their cars. We need to have them making shorter trips. I think that there are several elements associated with that. And again, I think that it's a land planning question. It's a question of how we live and where we live. We need to get people out of traffic. We need to do more things like staggering work hours and telecommuting. We have half the rate that Boulder, Colorado has. We need to do better with the intersections we have and choke point intersections. And we're going to need something to be able to deal with mass transit. You know, we were 14 years ago when we had the last election that we had. We just had another one here that failed. I wish we had had a better idea or better leadership coming out of Capital Metro in the city and more political will, but we have to get that back up on the table again.
Okay. And Mr. Adler, you both say that you want Austin to be a no-kill city. Does this extend to urban wildlife? And what place do steel leg traps have in your wildlife management plans?
I think you extend no-kill as much as you possibly can. And so the ordinances we have to be able to eradicate threats to the community in a humane way is something that we need to do, and steel traps doesn't fit within that scheme.
Councilmember Martinez.
Yeah, you know, you're either green or you're not. You're either humane or you're not. And steel leg hole traps are not humane. And I voted to eliminate using steel leg hole traps from eradicating things like coyotes from our urban wildland interface. I realize that coyotes are a problem, but they were here long before we were. And we need to respect that and understand that. And so being no kill and being humane transcends not only to what comes into our animal shelter, but to all wildlife that exists within our community, such as the item that I'm sponsoring with Councilmember Tovo next week to eradicate bullhooks from being used in circuses here in Austin.
Thank you. Ms. Martinez, how do you propose, Councilmember, how do you propose to balance park health and public access to our parks with special event demands?
By doing what we've already done, by saying you can't have any more events without further consideration by the council. We have to stop at some point, folks. I get that everybody wants to have their event, and everybody wants it on Congress Avenue because they want that great photo shot of the Capitol in the background. But the bottom line is we have 100 events on our roadways, and I know you're asking about open space, but it's the same dynamic. We only have 52 weekends in a year, and we've got 100 events in that same time frame. You can see the problems that we're facing. Our park space is bought and maintained by you all. It's owned by the public. It should be as accessible as possible to the public. I support our events. I like ACL Fest. I support things like Fun Fest and Pachanga Fest. But you have to maintain a healthy balance of understanding that our open space should be that. It should be open as much as possible.
Mr. Adler.
I think Mike sets out the problem real well. We have to do better than what we're doing now. We can't keep adding to it, but that's not a new problem. I mean, there's nothing we can describe it that way today. We could have described that same problem a year ago, and we could have described that same problem 2 years ago. What I would like for this city to have is the vision of what it means to have special events and parks use in our city 15 years from now. What is that vision that we agree on that says this is where it's going to be? This is what it's going to be. And then we can work back each year to ensure that we arrive in that place in 15 years. It's the long-term vision that I think is lacking. This is not an ad hoc problem, although we've been treating it as an ad hoc thing as we've been adding things to it. The city needs to have a more defined and definite long-term plan that it drives to.
Thank you both for your answers. We have reached the end of our questions, and now each candidate will have time for a 2-minute closing statement. Councilmember Martinez won the coin toss and will go last. Mr. Adler, you now have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for doing this, and thank you especially for the EcoNet website that exists. It's absolutely wonderful, and we need that in other areas in our city, so thank you. I lived in this city for 36 years, Austin, and I love this city. There's something incredibly special about this city. You go anywhere in the country and say you're from Austin, Texas, it means something. And what gets played back to you is not the growth or the economy. What gets played back to you is the spirit and soul of this city, and we need to protect it. I'm concerned about this city. I think Austin is at a tipping point. We have, I think, basic environmental questions that we need to resolve that are long-term, that deal with the water utility and the electric utility. We have other issues like transportation. We were the 26th most congested city, and now we're the 4th most congested city. We have affordability issues in this city where property values are rising 3 times faster than incomes. The poverty level is increasing. 53% of the African American kids in our city live in poverty. 44% of the Hispanic kids in our city live in poverty. We have to do better than that. We're losing people and communities in our city. We have a permitting process in the city that doesn't work. We're doing too much permitting and planning by exception and by variance, and we need to fix that. We need to do a better job of protecting our neighborhoods. We're at a tipping point in this city. You know, the 10-1 process that we have here is a gift to this city. It's bringing new leaders and communities, like I said earlier. It is a chance for us to reinvent government and government culture, and cities don't get those gifts, but we have one. And now we need we already have the first step in establishing 10-1. Now we have to go the second step. There are great ideas that we're hearing now, but you wonder, where were they over the last 8 years? We can choose the status quo, or we can choose a new way forward, and we have to do better. Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez, you now have 2 minutes.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thank you for hosting this event. And I'm so glad he said I have some great ideas, because he hadn't said that in the campaign thus far. The bottom line is, you never learn everything that you need to know at City Hall. And I've always said this: the day I walk into City Hall and think I know everything is the day I need to walk out of City Hall and not come back. Because you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to keep an open mind. And I certainly know that I have made decisions that have not made many folks in this room happy from time to time. But I also know that I've made some decisions that have made many folks in this room extremely happy. And that's the nature of what you do in government. You make decisions each and every week, and either half the room is going to be happy or half the room is going to be upset at City Hall. But you have to listen to all sides. You have to weigh your experiences, your values, and ultimately make a decision. I bring that vision, that new leadership to the mayor's office. You want to talk about new leadership in the mayor's office? I promise you, I bring that new leadership. You know, we're not running for a dictatorship. And Steve talks about all these things that he can do and that he would do and that he would have done over the last 2, 4, 6, and 8 years. But you're not a dictator when you're the mayor. You're the mayor, and you need to act that way. And you need to build coalitions with your colleagues and not try to one-up them every time they say something on the microphone, and not try to beat them down when they try to move initiatives forward. That will be a major difference between the current leadership in the mayor's office and the leadership that I bring. So I ask you to really take a look at the candidates. Go to my website, MikeForMayor.com. Give me your every consideration. Ask me the hard questions. I have answers. I have specifics. I don't speak in platitudes. I don't just say we need to get better and don't tell you how we're going to do it. I can make a difference as our next mayor, and I humbly ask for your support in this election. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's have a quick round of applause for our 2 candidates. Thanks very much. Randy?
Thank you again for joining us tonight for this historic debate brought to you by Austin Eco Network and Channel Austin. We encourage you to go to AustinEcoNetwork.com to the Elections tab and find all the Election Navigator tools we have assembled to help you learn about the candidates in each of the Austin City Council races. Remember that early voting for Austin City Council, ACC, AISD School Board has already begun and runs until December 12th, and Election Day is December 16th. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and please go vote and help get out the vote for this important runoff election.
Thanks, Randy.